Well, if you've been around yeshiva for a while, you've probably gotten the idea that the Torah is a system. It has different branches and different applications, but it is a system. There's certain central principles, and the central principles are organized in a certain way, and then the applications use the central principles in specific ways for specific purposes. And even things that look like they are trivial, or even worse, if the so-called scholarly crew tells you they're imported from the outside, you have to be on guard for that kind of mistake. And sometimes it takes some diligent digging to find what the source of it is and what the significance of it is, but the digging is worth it. I want to start with perhaps the most trivial detail of Lag BaOmer. All of the world is celebrated by lighting bonfires. What is that all about? And on the surface, it goes back to a certain biblical story. Elisha, the prophet, was a disciple of Elijah the prophet. And he was attending him just before Elijah left the world. As you probably know, he didn't die in a conventional manner. He went heavenward in a fiery chariot. And Elisha said to Elijah, I want you to grant me double your spirit. Double your spirit. Elijah. To which any one of us would have said, boy, that's a chutzpah. What are you talking about? Elijah? You want to have more double his spirit? So he answered, if you see me ascending to heaven, if you see me, your request will be answered positively. What's one thing got to do with the other? Well, the answer is that a person lives in this world and is subject to certain limitations. In particular, the physical body puts almost absolute limits on what he can accomplish, almost. So that even when he strives and makes a tremendous effort, but the ceiling on what he can accomplish. But as he's making the transition from what we call life to death, where the body is losing its hold on the soul can be illuminated by certain elements of what's on the other side of the divide, which you can't have when it's fully, vigorously alive with health. So Elijah told Elisha, if you see me ascending to heaven, you'll see me at a moment when my own spirituality is double. And says at that moment, I will have double my normal spirituality that I can give you. But if you don't see me, then you won't get that special gift. Okay, so from this we hear that at the moment of death, there is that special extra connection to the other side, which enables to be brought even into this world, an element of spirituality which otherwise wouldn't be there. Now, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, on the day that he died, gave a lecture. And in that lecture, he revealed certain Kabbalistic secrets which aren't mentioned anywhere else in the entire Kabbalistic corpus. So that day, because he was stepping into the divide, his body was losing its grip, he received a certain illumination from the other side, which he communicated in the form of the information in that lecture. There was an extra light, superior to the light that he gave throughout the rest of his life at that moment. That's what the bonfires are about. They're celebrating that extra light that he had on this date. Forget the roasted marshmallows and forget the fun for the kids and so forth and so on. It's a profound symbol. Profound symbol. And it's symptomatic of the fact that when Jews do something, they don't do it for trivial reasons, and they don't do it certainly because they're absorbing it from the external culture. Those kinds of explanations are always wrong. even if it's founded in external culture, if we take it, it's because it serves our purposes, not their purposes. You imagine someone who specializes in sharpening knives. There's some fabulously sharp knives from the ancient world, right? And what they use them for, I don't know. Knife throwing to kill their enemies, or skinning saber-toothed tigers, and so forth and so on. You see that we borrowed their techniques of sharpening knives. It wouldn't be for skinning saber-toothed tigers, and it wouldn't be for throwing knives at other people. The sharper the knife with which you slaughter the animal, the less the animal feels it, and the cleaner the cut, and the cleaner the cut that provides the death, which makes it kosher. And we have searched for methods for sharpening knives throughout the years. 200 years ago, there was a revolutionary new method. Instead of sharpening the knife on one side, so the blade looks like this, it's straight on one side and beveled on the other side. They invented the technology to have it beveled on both sides. And very quickly, all the slaughterers went over to because it's sharper and cleaner. Okay, that's just examples. Now, what is Kabbalah? What did Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai represent? What is the Zohar? First of all, if you translate Kabbalah as Jewish mysticism, that ain't it. The word Kabbalah means tradition or received. Kabbalah is to receive. So right away, this isn't his brilliant intuition or imagination or theorizing or brilliant analysis. It's part of a received wisdom. If you want to be mystified, take out the book of Ezekiel and read the first few chapters, and I guarantee you'll be absolutely mystified. Don't understand a word that you're reading, because he was expressing, in terms of the prophets, in direct terms, what was always possessed as part of the oral tradition. He was expressing it in such a way that, at least if you look at the verses, you know you're mystified and don't understand. And then you understand that something's being hidden. There's always been this semi-hidden part of the Jewish tradition. The Mishnah in Chagiga codifies it. Certain things are taught to only 2 students at a time or 1 student at a time, and only by giving the chapter headings and not by giving explanations. So there was always this esoteric doctrine that was kept in the hands of a tiny few and passed down by word of mouth. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was one of the greatest expositors of this wisdom. Now, no, the Zohar is not a book that he wrote, and no, he didn't write it when he was in the cave for 13 years. The Zohar is a collection of discussions. He had a yeshiva, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. They had students, and they had discussions. Travelers who knew these came through and spoke to him and to them, and he assigned Rabbi Abba, one of his students, to edit these discussions that took place in the yeshiva. Some parts of the Zohar are essays, straight essays, but many parts of it are just discussions, differences of opinion, and sometimes someone says, "Oh, your opinion's better than mine, so I take mine back." And Rabbi Abba edited it. It was edited to fit the verses in the Torah. It wasn't written as a commentary to the verses in the Torah. Now, what is the Kabbalah? What does it discuss? The answer is it discusses issues which, number one, are philosophically, metaphysically very fundamental, and they are issues which are hinted at pretty clearly in the exoteric material that's common and open to everyone, the Talmud, the Zohar, the Midrashim, even verses in the Tanakh. But as you'll see, they take them sometimes to a certain extreme purity, which you might not guess from the exoteric mentioning of it. And it's a vast, intricate, interlocking system, and a very intellectually challenging system. Thousands and thousands of pages have been written on Kabbalistic topics, and they are, I'm speaking as someone who did work in philosophy and mathematics, and I've studied it to a certain extent. It's very challenging, very complex, sometimes quite subtle, and requires all your attention, all your intellectual capability, and also all your intuitive sensitivity to create a picture of what's going on. And there are unsolved problems. These are unsolved by me, And then some of the writers say that they're unsolved problems, so I trust them. But it's a vast intellectual system. Now, just to give you a little hint of what's going on, let's take the very first verse of the Torah. I want to compare three levels. The level of pshat, which is roughly, very roughly, what you get from dictionary definitions, from comparing text in various places throughout the Tanakh, from paying quite close attention to grammar and context, and using logic. Let's say that that's a rough description of pshat. Then there's drush, which is a different level of questioning and a different set of resources for giving answers, as we'll see. And then there's sod. I'm skipping remez, as you may know. It's going to be sod. Sod would be the Kabbalistic, when the word really means secret. So according to Pshat, the first verse in the Torah tells us when the creation took place. When did it take place? And you translate it in the beginning, God created, so it was in the beginning. Or you translate Rashi, that there was a process, we're picking up in the middle of the process. Rashi's answer, the Rabbi has a different answer, but the subject in terms of Pshat is, when did the creation take place? The question usually that Pshat asks is, what do the words mean? What do the words mean? Now there's another question. After you've decided what the words mean, you can ask, okay, that's what these words mean in this circumstance. But why did the text use these words to mean this meaning? Weren't there other words that it could have used? Maybe simpler words, less ambiguous words? Why did the text choose these words to mean this meaning? And in answering that question, you get extra information about the text, because both questions are legitimate. What do the words mean, and why were these words used? You know, the person writes a letter. He tells you that he's going skiing. But did he mention the name of the mountain? If it's in France, did he use the French name or the American name? You can ask those questions, and you get more information about what the text is conveying. And the answer, according to Rashi, who brings the Midrash, is that God created so then the question becomes, why did the words mean what they mean? And the answer in the Midrashic level is, the text wants to tell us what the purpose of creation was. The base of Bereshis can mean for the sake of. The word Reshis becomes a code word for both the Torah and the Jewish people. And then you read the first verse as saying, for the sake of Torah and the Jewish people, God created the universe. So, why did the text use Reshis, which grammatically is a peculiar word? It should have used the word Rishonah or Tchilah. The stuff at the end makes it a construct. It really means beginning of. But there isn't a noun there in order to be the object of the of. So in Midrash, it says, look elsewhere in the Tanakh, see where the word Reshis is used, see what it's used for, and that's the purpose that goes here. So the word Reshis is used for the Jewish people, and it's used for the Torah. So you can read on the level of drush that this is the purpose for which the creation was made. Now the Zohar says as follows. We have various names of God. The Talmud tells us, and the Midrash tells us quite consistently, that different names are associated with different modes of divine action. The famous four-letter name of God, Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, is associated with mercy, Rachamim. The five-letter name, Aleph Lamed Hey Yud Mem, Elokim, is associated with strict justice, strict judgment. Aleph Lamed is associated with Chesed, loving kindness. Each name is associated with a mode of action. That's the way you read the Talmud and the Midrash on the surface, simplistically, meaning these are all names of God, the Creator, they're His names, but they happen to connote modes of His action. Okay, now you'll dig a little deeper and you'll find that both the philosophical sources and the Kabbalistic sources agree that God, the Creator, can't be described literally at all. can't be described literally at all. Because he's transcendent, because he's infinite, whatever those words mean. Transcends human intellect. So then you say, aha, so maybe the real truth is not that these are names of God, and also they happen to be associated with modes of action, but maybe all there is modes of action. Maybe that's all there is. Or anyway, that's all we can talk about. What's behind the modes of action, the agent behind the action, is beyond our ability to comprehend altogether. Oh ho! So then, when the Tanakh uses the name of God, it's answering an entirely different question. The question is, which mode of divine action is in operation in this case? When everything would be associated intuitively with God, since you can't talk about God, the question becomes, which divine mode is it? And then the name indicates which divine mode it is. Okay, so now, as you probably know, because Rashi mentions this, the first chapter of the book of Genesis, and the first 3 verses of the second chapter, use only one name, the name Elohim. After that, it's 2 names. Okay, then according to the introduction to the Zohar, the first verse of the Torah says something very dramatic. Okay, Elohim, that mode of divine action, is what's responsible for the creation of our world. Where did that mode of divine action come from? What's its source? This now becomes a question in the organization of the various different modes of divine action. Are they all on a par? Are they just separate and disconnected? No, they're in a hierarchy. What the Zohar says is this. The Beis of Bereshis, which is now getting 3 different meanings. The Beis of the Bereshis is the Beis of using something as a tool. When you dig with a shovel, the width is a Beis. So, some unnamed subject out of the text used Reshis, the Beis of Reshis, used something called Reshis, in order to create Elohim, which is that 3rd level down mode of divine action, and that's the mode of divine action that's responsible for the creation. So what are they? So Reshis now is a reference to another famous verse, Reshis Chochmah Yiras Hashem. The beginning of wisdom is the awe of God. So Reshis is a code word for Chochmah, for wisdom. So something used wisdom to create Elohim, which is strict judgment. And that thing which is beyond, which isn't mentioned, which used wisdom to create strict judgment, that thing is called in the Kabbalistic terminology Keser, the crown. So you have a picture here of which of the modes of divine action is operating in the creation. Now look what you have for the first verse of the Torah. You have the Pshat, which tells you when the creation took place. You have the Drush, which tells you what the purpose of creation is. And you have the Sod, which tells you what mode of divine action is operative and where it comes from. I think you could see that competing explanations. On the contrary, they fill in different parts of a compound picture. And the Sod, the last, is on the level that we probably would call theology. What do we know about God, and what parts of his operation can we describe and put together with what happens? This is a picture of where Sod comes from, where what's called secret is the teaching of the Zohar. So when you study part of Kabbalah is when you study verses or mitzvos or sections in the Talmud, if you look at them carefully, you can often see something's missing. Something's not complete. There's a hole in it. And if you look at the sources, you'll see that by appealing to Sod, you can fill the hole, and then you get a complete picture. But the picture has behind it shall I say, both a theological and spiritual reality, which isn't apparent on the surface. I'll give you a number of examples of this. You know, because we say it twice every morning, that God is continuously making the work of creation. things exist because they're being created now. God's will is giving them their existence now. Chadesh Tomit Ma'aser Bereshis. God makes anew the work of creation. Why is it that way? Why is it that way? The only one I know of who ever asked this question was the Ramchal, one of the greatest Kabbalists of all time, even though essentially he was a philosopher. That's my prejudice because I'm a philosopher. All I can say for my prejudice is that it's true. I've spoken to other people about it who aren't inclined the way I am, and they grudgingly agree with me at the end, usually. He asked this question, why should it be like that? God's not limited in power. He could make something and give it the ability to continue to exist on its own. He didn't. He chose not to do that. Why is that? His answer is so characteristic. His answer is that the goal of our creation, the goal of our existence, is to become identified with God. In a sense, attached to God, spiritually attached to God. In order for us to become identified with and attached to God, He has to be present. You can't attach yourself to something which is absent. God's will is recreating everything moment by moment. This table, your hair, the air that we breathe, all of it is being recreated. That means we are surrounded by the effects of God's will. So if I can seek out the godly in the things that God is creating, I can attach myself to His will because it's here and present. If He created the world and went on vacation, went on holiday, like the deists say, then in direct terms, attachment would be impossible. So this question, which starts out like a metaphysical question, why is this process of creation used, why not that process of creation, gets a very spiritual answer. Because the purpose of this is to be related to and connected to God, and you can't have it otherwise. This is an illustration of how the sod plugs a hole and what it plugs it with. Here's a Gemara, I will tell you now, is in the Pri Tzadik. There's a Gemara in Ksubas, famous Gemara. Till I read the Pri Tzadik, I didn't even realize that there was something that needed to be filled in. The Gemara there says, man's actions, at least on occasion, are greater than God's actions. Man's actions are greater than God's actions. Now, for the sake of the argument, the Gemara assumes that one-handed actions are inferior to two-handed actions. That's an assumption, and we're going to use it, and that's not where the problem lies. Now, sorry.
Can you just explain what that means?
Well, let me finish the proof, and then I think maybe it'll be clear. So then, when God created the heavens and the earth, there's a verse that says that He created the heavens with His right hand, and He created the earth with His left hand, each of which is a one-handed action. Now, the tabernacle, which we built in the wilderness, the tabernacle is described as Mikdash Hashem Konanu Yadecha, a holy place, O God, have your hands established, hands plural. So apparently the action of building the tabernacle is superior because of the two-handed action, as opposed to the actions of creating heavens and earth, which are one-handed actions. And of course, it's we who built the tabernacle. So when we built the tabernacle, we did something superior to what God did in creating the heavens and the earth. That's what the Gemara says. Do you hear that there's a missing piece? Listen to it again and see if you can pick up the missing piece. You know, the first approach to any text should be pretend you're 9 years old and you're have no imagination. You just hear the words, look at the dictionary, and it should make sense without filling in any gaps. Okay, so here we go again. Two-handed actions are superior to one-handed actions. And God created the heavens with His right hand and the earth with His left hand. So the creation of heavens is a one-handed action, and the creation of earth is a one-handed action. Now there's a tabernacle in the wilderness. That tabernacle is described by a verse, Mikdash Hashem Konanu Yadecha, a holy place, O God, have your hands, plural, established. So two hands are used to describe the tabernacle. So the building of the tabernacle is a two-handed action, and therefore it's superior to the creation of heavens and earth because those are one-handed actions. And we are the ones who built the tabernacle, so it's our two-handed action which is superior to God's one-handed actions. Anybody hear the fault? Anybody hear the missing piece? What's the verse that describes the tabernacle again? A holy place, O God, have your hands established. Oh, so the verse describes God's hands. Aha. But then the Gemara says, but of course we built it, right? We built it. Okay. So therefore what? Therefore our action becomes two-handed. Excuse me, it says your hands, not our hands, your hands. So there's a glitch. The verse is not describing what happened. The Pri Tzaddik says you have to understand the relationship between a Jew and God when he does a mitzvah. Not just in these following orders. There is such a thing in Jewish law as shlichus. A shliach, anybody know what a shliach is?
Messenger.
Okay, I'm glad you said that. It's not correct, but it should be on record. A shliach is an agent. It's someone who acts on someone else's behalf. If I want to buy a house, I'm out of town, I give you power of attorney. You sign my name to the contract and I become owner of the house. Because you're my agent, you're acting on my behalf. That's what shlichus is. So now, when a Jew does a mitzvah, he does it on behalf of the Creator. He's God's agent, acting in his behalf. Oh ho! So now, and of course, remember, when I give you power of attorney, you sign my name, I'm buying the house. You're just standing in for me. You sign my name, not your name. And you're standing in for me, and that's why I buy the house. Okay, so now, if when we do a mitzvah, we're doing it as God's agent. When we build the tabernacle, whose building is it? It's His building. It's His building. Because He built it through His agents. We are His agents. Okay, so now says the Pri Tzaddik, the Gemara in Ksubis is really comparing two different levels of divine action. Some divine actions God carries out by Himself, solo, so to speak. And some divine actions God carries out through His agents, which are the Jewish people. And now the Gemara is asking which divine actions are greater, the divine actions He carries out by Himself or the divine actions that He carries out through human agents. Now the proof in the Gemara is very direct. The divine actions of creating heaven and earth, which He carried out by Himself, are one-handed divine actions. The divine actions that He carried out through human agency in building the tabernacle are two-handed divine actions. Your hands, correct. And now for the final conclusion, look at the greatness of man. Man confers upon God action that he doesn't exercise on his own. I didn't say he can't, I said he doesn't. That's the way he chose to do things. Man confers upon God a quality of divine action that he doesn't exercise on his own. Now, you use this metaphysical idea that we are God's agents carrying it out for Him, and really the responsibility for the action goes to God, which is a deep sort of metaphysical, spiritual idea. And all of a sudden, this passage in the Gemara becomes easy to understand. And if that's hard to remember, I'll tell you something very simple, which you can ask people with black hats and see what the answer you get. There's something in the Gemara called a shliach mitzvah. A shliach mitzvah is a person who's on his way to do a mitzvah, and he enjoys certain protection. He also enjoys a lack of responsibility for other mitzvahs. So let's say a Jew has money and he's going to bargain ransom for a captive Jew. So he's on his way for pidyon shuim, what we call pidyon shuim, ransoming a captive Jew. Or you're on your way to the Beis Medrash to learn Torah. You're walking to the Beis Medrash. You are called a shliach mitzvah, and you get special status thereby. Okay, shliach mitzvah is two words. It's shliach mitzvah. Agent mitzvah. What does that mean? Who's agent? What's it talking about? So when you read it in the Gemara, you read it like one phrase and you go on to the next thing. Shliach mitzvah. But take it apart and ask, who's shliach and what is it doing here? The answer is because when you do a mitzvah, you're a shliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we have a rule, shluchu shel olam kamoso, that the shliach takes on the authority of the one who sends him, the one whom he represents. That being the case, it confers certain advantages on the shliach because he now takes on the mantle of the one who he's representing. And that's when we explain why a shliach mitzvah is immune to certain types of dangers, because he's representing God. Gives him that immunity. So all of a sudden, a common phrase, which is used many times in the Gemara for specific halachos, but not explained, gets an explanation. The explanation is based on a deep metaphysics, and the metaphysics gives you an appreciation for what's going on. I don't know if you ever use a Sephardi siddur, or certain Hasidic siddur, but if you do, and it's an interesting thing to do, at least to look at them, you'll find that two of the most common names of God are sometimes written with the letters interleaved. One name is a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, and the other is Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud. And usually it starts with a Yud, and then the Aleph, and then the Hey, and the Dalet, and then the Vav, and then the Nun, and then the Hey, and then the Yud. So you have the interleaving of the two names. And by the way, if you see old-style Siddurim, where instead of God's name they print Yud, Yud, that's because in this interleaving, the first letter is a Yud and the last letter is a Yud. It's not just saving space and ink. Okay. Now what is that? So there's a Zohar. And the Zohar says that in some purposes, in some connections, the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey is a graphic for a sword. The Yud is the handle, the long Vav is the blade, and the two Heys are the sharp surfaces of the blade. And the name Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud is the sheath of the sword. Because the name Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud contains the letters Din, Dalet, Yud, Nun. Dalet, Yud, Nun means Din, which means strict judgment. A sword is something with which you exercise strict judgment. So, when you put the sword into the sheath, the handle sticks out. So what you have is the Yud sticking out, and you have the Hey, Vav, Hey interleaved with the four letters of Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud, so they're hidden entirely in the sheath. And the sheath, because it's Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud, containing the letters Dalet, Yud, Nun, is called Bo Din. It contains Din. It holds Din. So this is the picture of the interleaving. Okay. Now when you start the Shemona Esrei, you say, Hashem Svasai Tiftach, V'yagiti L'Secha. Hashem, open my lips, and my mouth shall declare your praise. When you say Hashem there, which name is it? Say again? Yeah, it's the name that's spelled Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud. Not the name Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei. This is a verse. But the name there is Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud. So in a Kabbalistic siddur, what you'll see there is the Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud, Adnas, with the Yud and then the Hey, Vav, Hey inside, that interleaving, which signifies putting away the sword. So says the Zohar. Which means, shortly before this, you've been using the sword, but now you're coming to the Shemona Esrei, put it away. Because the Shemona Esrei is based on mercy. So you have to put the sword away. When you say that one word, Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud, at the beginning of the Shemona Esrei, that's what you think. Okay, we were using the sword, we're putting it away, we're now on the level of Rachamim. It gives a very profound meaning to that one word. You say that word, you experience it differently. Now, where were you using the sword? So this already, the Gemara says, that when you say Shema, you have a sword accessible to you to attack those who wish to hold you back, those who wish to hold you down, those who wish to cripple you in your spiritual efforts. So that's why you say it at night before you go to bed, to use that sword to clear the air of those who might want to pull you down. So when you say the Shema, you're using the sword. When you come to the Shema Esrei, you put the sword away. All of a sudden, there are understandings here that are revealed to us that we wouldn't have a clue about otherwise, but they're all there as part of the tradition. They are the deeper elements that are behind the things that we do and the things that we say. There's a story in the Gemara where a town had a problem. Problem was a shade. A shade is a certain type of creature. Michal discusses it in the first part of Derech Hashem. certain type of creature which has, like we're going to discuss it also, which has certain types of physical qualities and certain types of spiritual qualities. Now, let me just stop for a moment to clarify concepts. You have a spiritual realm and a physical realm. They're different. They have different qualities. You have one compound that's human, that has a spiritual part called the soul and a physical part called the body. That's a compound. We are two-dimensional creatures. A shade isn't like that. A shade has some spiritual qualities, some physical qualities, and it is its own third category. It's a homogeneous thing with some of each category. If you want an analogy, I would ask you, this is the question which philosophers of biology have not solved. Is a virus alive or dead? Well, we do know that it makes copies of itself. But on the other hand, it makes copies of itself by hijacking a cell to make copies. It doesn't have the copying mechanism within it like bacteria do. No, the hijack. So it's the kind of thing which, using something else, can make copies of itself. Is it really alive? Isn't it alive? It's sort of yes and sort of no. It's like on the borderline. It has some of the features and not some of the other features. You know. So shade's like a virus in that respect. Okay. So now,
How does it reproduce?
sorry,
How do demons shade and reproduce?
I didn't say how they reproduce more or less the way people do, but they have other features that are not like people.
Oh yeah.
One second, I'm trying to figure out where I was going here. We have the 4 types. Section. Sometimes when I pull in a footnote, I forget where I'm going. Where was I going to? Talked about this, right? Well, let me temporarily. It's on the tip of my tongue. Okay, let me tell you something else, which also you hear this very often. Every time you go to a Sheva Bracha, somebody says the word ish has a yud in the middle, and the word isha has a hey at the end, and the yud and the hey make God's name. So if they are peacefully dwell with one another, God's name is realized, and if not, then the yud and the hey are absent themselves, and you have eish and eish, fire and fire, and then it gets unpleasant. So you say, okay, fine. So the man contributes what he contributes, the woman contributes what she contributes, and they somehow make a whole out of it. But it's very important that he contributes to yud and she contributes to hey. And it's very important that his letter is in the middle of the aleph and shin, and her letter is not in the middle. It's at the end. That's not a throwaway. So in a certain sense, a yud is a giving letter, and a hey is a receiving letter. And his yud splits the aleph and shin so that it disrupts the fire. Whereas her letter at the end, the hey, modifies, pacifies, quietens the fire, but doesn't disrupt it. So what they are giving to each other are very different. And that part of the creative energy in a relationship between man and woman is making a consistent functioning whole out of elements that are really quite different from one another. The more different the elements are, the more creativity you need in making a whole out of it. So if you meditate on the nature of the letters and what the positions in the words, you get a kind of graphic of the way in which the relationship has to be constructed. And by the way, as my oldest son pointed out to me many years ago, don't confuse giving and receiving with active and passive. The concepts are utterly, utterly different from one another and utterly independent of one another. Very often, in a transaction where A gives to B, what initiates the transaction is B. B presents himself and says, I need, or asks, or points out what could be done, and A says, thank you, I agree with you, and then transfers from himself to B. So that in that case, it's the receiver who initiates the interaction. It's the receiver who's active, and it's the giver who's reactive. So don't ever confuse give and receive with active and passive. They're two entirely different. In fact, in Kabbalistic treatments, if the receiver is the one who initiates the interaction, it's a much more complete interaction. It's a much more complete interaction. The reason for that is roughly that the giver wants to give. The giver wants to give unlimitedly. It's the limitations of the receiver to receive that sets a limit on the transaction. So if the receiver not only requests, but prepares himself to be a receiver, he then enables the giver to do what the giver wants to do. So the real activity comes real. Everything's relative, everything has exceptions, but in this description that I'm telling you, the real activity comes from the receiver. At any rate, this is the Yud and the Hey in the marriage relationship. Now, here's another thing. There are 613 commandments. According to the Kabbalah, each soul has 613 components, so that each body has 613 components. History has 613 components. The Jewish people, everything is based on a pattern of 613. It's not the only pattern. 10 is also a pattern, but 613 is a pattern. And one element of these patterns is that when you do a mitzvah, it has an effect on the corresponding part of the body. To which arises immediately the question, but look, no Jew can do all 613 commandments. Some are only for priests, and some are only for kings, and some are only for men, some are only for women. It's just not possible. Not to mention the tricky problem that no one can completely, perfectly fulfill all 613 commandments because, for example, one commandment is, if you stole something, return the stolen property. Oh ho! So to fulfill the commandment of returning stolen property, you have to steal it first and break that commandment. So you're not getting all 613. So then the question is, so how does my body get its spiritual sustenance? There are certain things that I cannot do. I'll never be able to do. So how does it get their sustenance at all? There are many answers to this question, but the answer I want to focus on now is this, that the Jewish people is a single collective entity. That just like there's a bloodstream that joins all the living organs of your body, because they all need blood, so there's an invisible bloodstream that connects all of the Jewish people to one another, so that if Reuven does a mitzvah over there, that secretes a certain spiritual addition to the bloodstream, and then when that blood travels to other Jews, that extra secretion becomes available to them. So we really do these mitzvahs, we do them individually, but their effect is communal, and it's communal in both directions. Now, if you will look again in a Sephardi Siddur or in a Kabbalah, or in a Hasidic Siddur, you'll see there's a certain formula that we recite before we do a mitzvah, and one phrase in that formula is B'Shem Kol Yisrael. I'm doing this mitzvah in the name of the whole Jewish people, because I'm aware of this. I'm aware of the fact that when I do this mitzvah, I'm making this spiritual energy available to other Jews, and I also am receiving spiritual energy from them. And to a certain extent, that's true even, let's say, for the mitzvahs that were done in the temple, because they left an imprint in the continuing Jewish people. Even when people die, Jews die, new Jews are born, but the people is one people. It's a little bit like the cells that you lose. You know very well, your cells are dying and being replaced all the time. Even your atoms are being replaced all the time. They estimate every 7 years you have a completely new set of atoms. You have continuity because they become part of you. And you can see this if you're, let's say you're 6 years old and you get a scar, often that scar follows you for the rest of your life. That irregular piece of skin, it may grow larger, but it remains irregularly structured because of the injury that you sustained 50 years before. So similarly, when Jews at the time of the temple did mitzvos, and they created that spiritual energy from those mitzvos, they injected it into the ongoing life of the Jewish people, so that when individual Jews leave and new Jews replace, that energy is available for them also. So the unity of the Jewish people throughout space, throughout time, is a deep Kabbalistic concept, but it has implications as to understanding what we do. They used to say in Europe that if a student in the Volozhina yeshiva would pick up his eyes from the Gemara and daydream, a Jew in America would intermarry. Because, in fact, everything is connected to everything. That's, again, the idea of the Kabbalistic point of view gives a much different, richer perspective on what we're doing. I'll give you one or two more examples, and I'll be finished. If you follow the Sephardi structure of prayer, which Ramchal, he grew up in Italy, so it's organized like this. First you have some material about sacrifices, then you have some psalms, then you have the Shema, then you have the silent prayer. That's climbing a mountain to the top, which is the fourth level. Then you come down the bottom, the other side of the mountain, you have Asher Ublatzion, which has Kodesh, 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 which is parallel to the Shema. Then you have the Shir Shel Yom, which is parallel to the Psalms. And then you have the Ketores, which is more about the sacrifices. You come down to the bottom. Aleinu is not part of prayer. Aleinu is a postlude that you say before you leave the synagogue. And one simile of this is on Shabbos morning when you have two prayers, Shachris and Musaf, you don't say Aleinu in between. There are some who do, but the vast majority don't because you're not leaving yet. You say Aleinu after Musaf because then you're leaving. So really the prayer has 7 parts. 3 parts leading up to the top, then the top, and then 3 parts coming down. Now, the Kabbalistic understanding of these parts is as follows. These are elements of the creation in a certain sense, and you're starting at the lowest. And by saying the sacrificial material at the beginning, you're taking, let's call them 4, 3, 2, and 1. You're attaching level 4 to level 3. When you say the Psalms, you're attaching level 3 to level 2. When you say Shema, you're attaching level 2 to level 1. When you come to the silent prayer, you're addressing level 1 so as to justify a flow from level 1. Then on the other side, you're following the flow down. When you come down to Asher Uvlatzion, so then you have parallel to the Shema, Kodesh, 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 and then you come. That's level 3, and then you say the Shir Shel Yom is level 2, and then you say the Torah about the sacrificial part at the end. That's level 1. So what you really want is energy from level 1 to flow down to level 4, or through all the levels, right? So the order could be questioned. The order is attach 4 to 3, and 3 to 2, and 2 to 1, and then interact with 1 to generate a flow, and then the flow will come down. Why not do it this way? Attach 2 to 1, and then address 1, and it'll flow from 1 to 2. And then pick up 3, and it'll flow to 3, and then pick up 4, and it'll flow to 4. Why not do it that way? Why do it the other way? And the answer is, the purpose of the flow is to get to 4. That's the purpose. So if 4 isn't connected, nothing flows. There's no purpose of going from 1 to 2. 2 is just a step on the way to 4. So you have to know that the bottom is the goal. You say this in Luchadoidi. Sof ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. That's a deep Kabbalistic concept. That which is last in action is first in thought. Your first thought is the goal. With your mind, you say, if I want to get there, how do I get there? Well, I get there by getting to here, and get there by getting to here, get there by getting to here, and here I can step on. And then you get on here, and you go from here to here to here to here, which means the place you thought of first, the place you get to at the end of the process. Because you're thinking of the goal. If you don't have four connected, nothing's going to flow from one. Because it's for the sake of four. Similarly, the tefillin embody a certain flow from above to the head, which is the neshama, the mind, from the neshama to the heart, and from the heart out to the limbs of the body. The flow is from head to heart to the limbs. But you put the tefillin on the arm first, which is then opposite the heart, and then you put the head tefillin on the head second. Why? If the flow is coming down, put it on top down. No, because until the bottom's connected, nothing will flow. So you start at the bottom and connect the bottom up level by level till you get to the top. So this becomes a whole picture of how your relationship with God works. I'll give one more illustration of this from another angle. I told you at the beginning, this is a systematic thinking. The Gemara says that the color of tzitzis, the blue color of the blue thread in tzitzis, is similar to the color of the sea, and the color of the sea is similar to the color of the heavens, and the color of the heavens is similar to the throne of glory. Okay, if you want to tell me that I'm connected, simply tell me that the color of the blue thread is similar to the color of the throne of glory. Why put in intermediary steps? So if you know a little logic, you know the answer already. If A is similar to B, and B is similar to C, and C is similar to D, A doesn't have to be similar to D at all. Because each one's getting further away. We're only talking about similarity. Similarity runs out after a while. So what we're being told to us here is this: that the color of the string of the tzitzis is not similar to the throne of glory. You can't get from the tzitzis to the throne of glory without going through the sea and the heavens first to get there. You got to bring them along, otherwise you can't be connected. You see the similarity of these ideas, and you see there are themes here, and the themes are carried out in verses. I gave you two Kabbalistic illustrations of it from the order of prayer and the tefillin. The other one I quoted from the Gemara. These ideas are found, that each one's found on its own level, but they're very similar in structure because it's one system. So what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai revealed a great deal of to us is this level of the ultimate theology and the ultimate spirituality of the way in which the Torah works. And that, with the fire that he brought into the world on the day of his death, that's what we are celebrating on Thursday. Yisashem.